All right, now we can look at styling the children elements that are inside of the header. If you see here, this is what we've got so far. And the child elements that are in the header, if you take a look here, are going to be this nav that's got inside of it an A tag that has an image. That's what this is. And then below that is a div that is basically like an organizational wrapper. It doesn't really serve any other purpose except for the styling, but it organizes the H1 and this paragraph byline together. And so let's go ahead and take a look real quick at how we can get this image a little bit smaller and up here. So the first thing that I would suggest is making the actual IMG a little bit smaller. So let's go down here, and underneath the header, what we can do is, well, first of all, we don't have to do it as a descendant rule, because if you look here, this anchor link has an ID of logo top on it, right? So what we could do is we could say logo dash top, and then I'm just going to leave that as an empty rule because I do want to style logo top, but before I do that, I want to go ahead and make a rule. I'm going to just copy this for the logo top image so that the IMG tag that is inside of this anchor link with the logo top ID on it will be a certain size. So let's say that it's going to be width, and let's try something like, I don't know, let's see what it would be like, maybe 20% of the browser width, so that maybe it'll scale with the browser width, something like that. All right, and right now it's centering it because if you remember, what it's happening is that this IMG right here is a width of 80. All right, well, I just overrode the width of 80% and it's now 20, but it's still taking the display block and margin auto, right? It's still taking those rules, just so you understand that's why it's centered up there. All right, but the width is being overridden. All right, so the next thing that I would want to do then is go ahead and up here where I've got logo top, I could also tell that now to be absolute. Let's say that this is position, because remember the header is actually relative, so as long as I've got an absolutely positioned thing inside of something that's relative or absolute or whatever, then it will behave and it will follow the relative parent, all right, as opposed to just following the exact location of the browser viewport. So let's go ahead and say position absolute, and then you see the first thing it does is it pulls it out of the document flow. Well, now it's confused. It's like really tiny. So I don't know if this is the right way to do this, where I've got width of 20%. That might not be exactly how I want to do this. What I might want to do instead is say width is 100%, right? And then I can tell the anchor tag to be exactly how big I want it to be. And so this logo top, remember that this is an A tag, all right? It could be like that, right? But I'm not going to do that because I don't have to. But it's an anchor link, so I can say that this width, for instance, is 20%, and it would be 20% of the browser viewport, because if you look here, its parent is the nav. I haven't told the nav how big to be, which means that the nav would automatically be 100% of its parent, which is the header. The header is 100% of its parent, which is the article. Same is true for main, same is true then for body, right? So ultimately, if I tell the image to be 100% of its parent, who is 20%, then I have better control over what's happening to it, all right? So that's now absolute, and it's scaling, which is what I'd like for it to do, right? Scaling. Now the other thing that I can do is I can tell this position absolute thing to have a top offset, and let's say we want that to be about 20 pixels maybe, and let's just see how that looks bumped down. All right, so that top offset bumped it down, and then we can have it left, and the left offset we can either do in pixels, or since it's scaling in a percentage, maybe we want to do it in a percentage. Let's see what happens at 2%. All right, so the left offset then pushes it off to 2%. All right, and then so we've got something that looks like this. And I don't know if this is the size that I actually want it, so maybe the width then should be something like 30%. Maybe that's better. I don't know. We can play around with that and get it to be however we want it to be. I think maybe 30 is too big. Let's try 25%. Okay. That might be a little bit better. Anyway, we can continue monkeying around with that. But now we've got this offset set up. And the other thing too that you might notice is that I don't want it to get too small, right? So what I might do instead is I might decide to tell it that I'm going to have, for the image, I might say min width so that it doesn't go below something, right? Say min width like maybe 100 pixels so it never gets below 100 pixels. Let's see. Then that way it doesn't get too small. The other thing I can do is I can, if I don't want it to get way too big, like that's pretty big, we can also have a max width. So we'll say max, and that will only override the regular width if it exceeds a certain size. So we'll say max width. Let's try like 170 pixels and see how that looks. And then see, it doesn't keep getting bigger, it just keeps moving out. And like, I don't know, for instance, if I really want this then to be a percentage. So what you can check out, and this is what's happening, okay, so that you have an understanding of what's going on, is if I select over here on line 64, if I select logo top, you'll see that it shows me the bounding box for it, okay? And then if I select the IMG, it shows me how big the IMG is. So if that's kind of hard for you to see in this video, the other thing that you can do is you can right click this. In Chrome, you can go to inspect. You can do this in Firefox too, but I like using the Chrome inspector personally. But if I go to inspect it, then I can actually highlight things and it'll show me exactly the space, and it stays selected. So that's, I find, a little bit better. Anyway, but if I select this IMG right here, and don't worry if it says data brackets ID, that's just because it's running through the brackets little web server up here, and so it's using JavaScript to make these live preview updates. Anyway, so it says IMG. If I select that, and then I expand this out a little bit more, you'll start to see that it becomes kind of misaligned. In fact, if you want to make this a little bit easier even, if you are in Chrome, you can click the little three dots right here and you can dock this to the bottom, or you can dock it in a different window or whatever, and it might be a little bit easier whenever you're trying to figure out stuff based on width. So if I select this IMG again and I hover over it, it'll show me in blue, it shows me the element, but then up here in orange, it shows me the margins. And that's what's happening, is that the margins are being pulled. If you remember, the margins are being pulled from the rule that is up here. If we go back up here to this original IMG rule, where we say display block margin auto, it's automatically splitting the difference. And whenever the picture gets bigger, and I say, hey, it can't get any bigger than this maximum width of 170 pixels, well, it stops getting bigger, therefore the margins start getting bigger, and that's why the space on the left grows. And so for this particular image, I might not want this to be margin auto. I might want the margin on the left to be 0. All right. And the other way that you can see that when you're in the inspector is that when I select something, all right, it will also show me on the right side, it'll show me the styles, or if you've got this in a vertical format, it'll show it below. But it'll show me the styles that are being applied to that specific element. And so the rule that's taking the most effect is this one on its logo top IMG, right? But then it also is following, and this is what I was showing you before in brackets, it's also following that first rule that it ran into, that it read, where it's display block margin auto, All right, and if you wanted to check and see what would happen, like if you tested this, you could say, all right, well, let's just see what would happen if I said margin left, for instance, and I said 0. Then it pushes it back over here so that no matter how wide this thing gets, it will still continue to maintain its relationship right here to the edge. So I think that that's what I like. So I'm gonna close this up. One of the things that I will tell you is that if you're using live preview with brackets and you open the inspector, it might break your live preview. So I'm just going to close it and start a new live preview. So before I do anything here, I'm going to go where it says logo top image, and I'm going to add that margin dash, margin dash left, and we're going to say that it's 0 for this particular image. And then if I do my live preview, you'll see that it in fact is staying put. That's good. That's the way that I'd like it to be. All right. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. And then you see it does get smaller, but it doesn't get any smaller than 100 pixels. All right. So that's how you can deal with this little contribute logo. The next thing is we want to be able to take this div that has the H1 and the byline paragraph and center it and do some other styling. So to do that, if you remember back from something else that I showed you how to do, there's a way that if you don't know where the vertical center is on something, that you can make it so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this thing that's in a div, that's in a wrapper, and I'm going to write a style for it so that it becomes absolute, and then I absolutely center it. So let's go down here, and I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to say that inside the header, the div in the header. All right, so we'll say header with a div descendant. Okay, it's going to behave the following way. First of all, I'll say position absolute, because if you remember, oops, position, let's try that again. If I say position absolute, that'll work because its parent, the header, remember we made relative. So it will travel with the relative parent. All right, now what you can do, if you remember for doing absolute vertical and horizontal positioning, what we need to do is give it a top offset and a left offset, and I'm going to give it top of 50% offset and left 50% offset. Let's do 50%, there we go. And then the next thing that you have to do is you have to do this thing called, first of all, it's transform, and then it's going to be a value of translate, if you remember us doing this before, and then we're going to give it negative 50% horizontal offset, and then comma negative 50% vertical offset, right? And then what it'll do is perfectly center what is in that div, okay? And so, and it doesn't matter like how big we make the viewport, it'll keep that centered, okay? So that's the way that you would do that. And it takes these three things along with an absolute position, right? So top 50%, left 50% for the offsets, and then you transform those offsets by translating them negative exactly the same amount, okay? And then it will automatically always keep it centered. All right, so that's how you can do that really easily. Now, the next thing that we're going to do in the next video is we'll go ahead and style this H1, and we will style the byline as well. Okay.